Quick news breakdown for you then. Let's think through how newspaper articles that we read and videos that we watch and news sources that we see on the internet presume certain things. Now, the presumption of those things I don't actually reject all the time, but it's helpful for us to recognise what those presumptions are, those presuppositions. And if we can't recognise these, then we're likely to just be taken for a ride by people, and we won't be very self-aware either. There's been a few articles recently that have come out that are quite close to my heart and will be close to anybody who has any kind of soft heart towards other people, and it's about violence against women. And so the Guardian on Wednesday the 7th of July this year, Jamie Grierson wrote an article headed "Epidemic of Violence Against Women Underway in England and Wales." And it says that in an interim report, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services calls for councils, schools, health and social care bodies and all areas of the criminal justice system to work together to address the problem, as police cannot solve this alone. So I want us to think through three quick things which are presumed throughout this article and another I'm going to read out from the BBC. You can find the links down in the description. Three things that are presumed. One is that we should protect the weak. Another that is the church has nothing to do with things. And another is that there is no possibility of transformation for individuals. So protect the weak, church, no possibility of transformation. Think about it. When we come to this issue of violence against women and girls, quite rightly, we say this is terrible. We should protect these women and girls who are vulnerable. But there is a huge presumption there, isn't there? Like why should we protect the weak? Well, from a Christian point of view, it makes a whole lot of sense to protect the weak. Like, the gospel is that Jesus, who is powerful, comes into his creation, and those who are weak and unable to rescue themselves, he rescues them. We see as well with Jesus that women actually were not repelled by him, but seemed to actually want to be around him and supported him in his ministry, and he had female friends, and so women have a place in Jesus' story, which is different to what we would have if we were consistent with an atheistic worldview. So I'm not going to say that atheists don't care for women. Of course they do. But that's not because they're atheists. So let's think about this. Well, let's say we're in a world where God doesn't exist. That there is no God at all. All there is matter in motion. There's just chemical reactions going off in people's minds, and that's all that's happening. Why should we protect the weak? Why should we look after those who are most vulnerable? Well, somebody might say, well, I want to protect the weak. I want to care for women. I don't want to see them hurt because I was taught to do that. And I've got a mother or a daughter or sisters who I care about, and so I don't want them to be hurt. But that's entirely arbitrary. It's based on our own desires there. Who cares? Somebody else comes along and says, well, actually, I do want to hurt women, and that's what I see as the best thing. So in that world in which there is no God, if that's our approach to how reality is, we have actually no basis for rejecting it. Now, somebody might say, well, from an evolutionary point of view, we should protect women because they're going to procreate. Well, there's two things there, aren't there? On the one hand, women can procreate while still being abused. That's a horrible thought, but that's the reality. You don't have to be nice to a woman for her to be able to have a baby. And so actually that evolutionary argument doesn't really work purely from the purpose of procreation. Equally, the whole presumption that survival is the greatest goal and the continuance of human life is the greatest goal is a massive presupposition. Why? What about the person who says, well, I don't care about that. I don't have a problem with that. I'm happy if I just get my pleasure now. I want my kicks now, and that's the greatest goal. I'm just a hedonist, and it's all about my own personal satisfaction. Well, if we're in a purely material universe where there is no God and there is no objective moral standard, who am I to say to the rampant, abusive hedonist that he's wrong? Because there is no real wrong. But secondly, let's just look at what this presumes with regards to the church. So I read out the list of different bodies that Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services calls for help from, because they say that police cannot solve this alone. And so they called for councils, schools, health and social care bodies, and all areas of the criminal justice system to work together. It's good for those different bodies to work together. When it comes to, for example, the police, they have a key role in terms of enforcing the law, and Romans 13 is clear about this, that there's no authority except those that God's put in place, and that one of the roles of the governing authority specifically is to wield the sword. It's to punish the wrongdoer. And so it's good for there to be a recognition that all areas of the criminal justice system should be involved. But did you see the omission here? What was seen as kind of irrelevant? Well, it's the church. The bodies that are really important, councils. If you work for a council, you're not going to... I think you might see some of the shortcomings there, but councils, schools, health and social care bodies, and all areas of the criminal justice system. These are the bodies who are seen as key to solving this problem. And so what's presumed, it's a silent presumption, but it's there, is that the church has no role here whatsoever. Our tendency is to split stuff up and go, well, this is the real life stuff where that councils are involved with, and schools and social care, and that's the real stuff. But the religious stuff's just over here. It's separate. It doesn't really make any difference. People can do it. They can have their own little faith-based thing, but it's not directly involved. But that's a massive presumption. It's a massive presumption. And actually, historically, the church has played a massive role in the well-being of societies. Now, I'm not for a moment going to argue that that's always been good. In fact, there are many religious institutions today that should just shut down. You think straight away of some of the scandals within the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England as well with regards to sexual abuse, and it's tempting to go, the church has nothing to offer here. And yet historically, the church has been a massive force for positive change in societies. I've been reading recently a book about a guy called John Elias, who was a preacher in North Wales and specifically Anglesey. And he made a massive difference through his preaching ministry and through the church gatherings that occurred there to the levels of drunkenness and debauchery and lawlessness that were going on the island at that point. Through history, churches have made a big difference. Now, what should happen then? What does this look like on the ground? Well, let's say that a man is beating his wife or abusing his daughter. What should happen then? Well, they should call the police, absolutely. But as well, that man should be dealt with by the elders of the church. There should be qualified spiritual leadership within the church who has the authority and the capability to discipline that man appropriately, to deal with him and call him to repentance. So by all means, on the one hand, there's going to be the legal consequences that he might encounter within society, but also there's going to be a church response both to him and also to care for the victim as well. But in this article, that's presumed to be irrelevant. And I can understand why. Like, the person writing this article almost certainly have not sat down and gone, right, you know, I'm going to ignore the church. They won't have done that. But we've come to a place in our society where the role of the church is sidelined, and so it's perfectly natural to write those kind of sentences and then ignore it. And we need to be aware of that when we're reading things. Last thing I want us to look at, because we've looked at protecting the weaker, we'll talk about church, and the last thing I want us to think about is the possibility for change, for transformation. I'm going to go over to an article by the BBC. This article is from 4 days ago, and it's titled "Violence Against Women, Top Police Role Announced." And it says that a top police officer will be put in charge of tackling violence against women and girls in England and Wales, the Home Secretary has announced. Special correspondent Lucy Manning has commented in this way on it. Violence against women has always been an issue, but in March the murder of Sarah Everard brought acute distress and anger. It changed the idea that women would remain silent about their experiences. This next bit's heartbreaking. And the launch of Everyone's Invited, where schoolgirls and students spoke out about their sexual assaults and rapes. Just pause for a moment. Schoolgirls, sexual assaults and rapes. Like, what on earth? We are so broken as a society where there can be initiatives where suddenly all this comes to light. Schoolgirls and students being raped and sexually assaulted. This is absolutely outrageous. This wasn't my point about transformation, but in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the death penalty was required for rape. So that's just something to consider when you're thinking about how long a guy should be going to prison for and those kind of things. Biblically, death. And the launch of Everyone's Invited, where schoolgirls and students spoke out about their sexual assaults and rapes, shone a much needed light on what women were facing. Wow. And then she comments this. The government's reaction to this is, sensibly, to take a comprehensive approach trying to improve policing, transport, education, victim support and offender management. She goes on to identify how that doesn't seem sufficient and actually it's going to need more. And she comments, for example, that the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners said it welcomed the whole system approach to tackling violence, but added it would only succeed with sustainable funding. So they want it to succeed. It's good they wanted it to succeed. But what's going to make it succeed as far as they're concerned is sustainable funding. If you just give us enough money, then we will actually make this epidemic of violence against women and girls and sexual assaults against them stop. Well, that's a noble goal, but I want to suggest to you that that's not going to be sufficient. It's not going to be sufficient. Look at what this special correspondent has highlighted. That the government's reaction is sensibly to take a comprehensive approach trying to improve policing, transport, education, victim support and offender management. Those are important areas which can be looked at. Improve policing. Yeah. Transport, like make it safer for women to get around and that kind of thing. Education. Presumably that's to do with teaching people that women are valuable and important and kind of teaching them to think like a Christian, basically. Victim support and offender management. But do you see what happens with the offender there? What we need to do is we just need to manage them. We need to manage them. There's no possibility of transformation. The presumption is that that's just how the offender is. They're just going to stay like that. And what we need to do is make sure that we just penalise them more and just try to keep them away from the women. Just try to stop them from attacking. Now, I'm all for that. By all means, hard penalties. By all means, protect the women. Keep offenders away from vulnerable people, by all means. But what gets missed out here is what the Bible clearly teaches about, and what Jesus spoke explicitly about, is that people can be transformed on the inside. The way that Jesus referred to it was to be born again. The Christian word for that is regeneration. That's when a heart which is rebellious against God and would seek to abuse other people, and it is fundamentally about itself, twisted inwards on itself, that heart, that old dead stony heart, is taken out and a heart of flesh is put in. A heart which it desires to please God and know Him and desires to care for other people around them as well. That heart of stone being taken out and the heart of flesh being put in is central to the Christian understanding of what happens when somebody becomes a Christian. And yet, that transformation of an individual is not something that we normally think about these days. We presume it can't happen. We presume it can't happen. Can you imagine if that did happen, though? Can you imagine if sex offenders were actually changed on the inside, not just managed, not just kind of bumpers put around them to make sure that as they're going through life with their unbridled passions wreaking havoc around them, instead of just putting guardrails around them, that actually they were changed on the inside. Well, the biblical story is that actually can happen. That's what the Bible teaches happens. I mean, we think of, and this isn't with regards to sexual assault, but this is with regards to religious terrorism. The Apostle Paul was somebody who hated Christians and would have them handed over to the police and put to death. He would celebrate and support horrific things being done to Christians, and yet his heart was entirely transformed, totally changed from his former identity as a persecutor and a blasphemer and full of hate, and yet he met Jesus and that changed him. So as we come to these articles, I want us to be thinking, what's the view of the world that kind of underpins this, and what are the presumptions that are being made here? Anyway, I hope that's helpful to you guys. Feel free, drop something in the comments if you want, and see you soon. Bye.